She is 52 years old, lying alone in a hospital room at 2 in the morning, and the only sound in the world is the mechanical beeping of a heart monitor that does not know her name or her story or the 30 years she spent giving every available piece of herself to people who are not in this room tonight. The four-line runs from her left hand to a bag of fluid dripping in the dark above her, and the hallway light outside her door makes a thin stripe across the tile floor that stops just short of reaching her bed, as if even the light has decided not to come all the way in. Her name is Vivian Carter. She was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, the oldest daughter of a woman who worked double shifts and still found time to braid her daughter's hair on Sunday mornings before church, and she has spent her entire adult life being, in every possible sense, the woman her mother raised her to be: strong, self-sufficient, the one who holds things together, the one everyone calls when something falls apart. Tonight, the room is empty. Tonight, no one is calling her. She has been in this hospital for 6 days. Her husband, Marcus, the man she stood beside at Greater Zion Church in 1994, the man whose children she carried and delivered and raised and poured herself into for 26 years, has visited once. He came on the second day, stayed 45 minutes, mentioned something about his schedule, and has not been back. Her son, Jordan, 29 years old, healthy, living 25 minutes from this hospital, has not answered a single one of the 9 calls she has made since her surgery. Her daughter, Kayla, 26, the one Vivian drove to every cheerleading practice, every college campus visit, every appointment that ever needed attending, has sent 3 text messages. Not calls, texts. All 3 said some version of the same thing. Thinking of you, Mom. Hang in there. Vivian has read each one of them multiple times with the specific hope that rereading them might change what they are. They are not calls. They are not a body in a chair beside her bed. They are 3 rectangles of light on a screen, and they are not enough. She reaches for her phone because she does not know what else to do with her hands at 2 in the morning in a room this quiet. She opens Jordan's contact. She has called him 9 times in 6 days. She stares at his name. She is a woman who raised 2 children largely on the strength of her own will, who worked full-time and came home and cooked dinner and helped with homework and showed up at every school event and managed the household and carried the emotional weight of a marriage that had been tilting in one direction for years. She has never asked Jordan for anything he could not easily give. She is asking now, with her thumb hovering over his name at 2 in the morning, and the answer that has come back 9 times is the same answer that is coming back right now: silence. She puts the phone down on the tray beside her. She looks at the ceiling, and she thinks, with the specific clarity that illness strips a person down to, after everything I gave, how did I end up here? My name is Vivian Carter. I was born in Atlanta, Georgia in 1971, the first of 4 daughters born to Dorothy Simmons, a woman who never had the luxury of being fragile and who made sure her daughters understood that fragility was not available to them either. I grew up watching my mother hold everything together with nothing but her 2 hands and her refusal to quit, and I took every bit of that into my adult life. I worked as a hospital administrator for 25 years. I was the person at the office who handled the hard conversations, the difficult families, the situations that no one else wanted to walk into. At home, I was the one who remembered every appointment, every permission slip, every birthday, every need that anyone in my household had ever had. I was the backbone. I was the one who did not break. That was my identity. That was the only version of myself I knew how to be. And then, in the winter of 2023, I got sick. And the people I had spent my life holding up did not hold me back. Not one of them. What happened over the 2 years that followed is a story I kept private for a long time, because where I come from, you do not air your family struggles. But I am telling it now, in 2026, because too many women are sitting alone in their own version of this room, and they need to know they are not the only one. By the time this story ends, and I promise you it does not end in that hospital room, you're going to understand something about love and about family and about the difference between the people who are present in your life and the people who are genuinely for you that I could not have put into words 2 years ago. I am going to tell you about the diagnosis. I am going to tell you about the people who left. I am going to tell you about the strangers who stayed. And I am going to tell you about what happened just weeks ago, something that none of the people in this story saw coming, including me. Stay with me, because this is the story I would not have believed if someone else had told it. And I lived every single minute of it. Before we go into the full story, there are 3 questions I want to put in front of you that are going to anchor everything you are about to hear. The first question is this: how does a woman who spent 26 years as a wife, a mother, a caretaker, a backbone, who never once asked for more than she was willing to give back twice over, end up completely alone in a hospital room 6 days after major surgery, without a single overnight visitor, without one person who came and stayed, not a meal delivery left at the nurse's station, not a card, not a family member who said "I am staying until you are strong enough to go home"? How does a life of that kind of giving produce that kind of silence? The second question is one I want you to sit with honestly. What made her own children, people she had physically kept alive, emotionally sustained, financially sacrificed for through every stage of their lives, decide that their sick mother's recovery was something they could afford to be absent for? And the third question is the one that changes everything, the one that is going to stay with you long after this video ends. What happened 2 years later that reversed the entire story in a way that nobody in it saw coming? Those 3 questions are the map of this story. Everything you are about to hear is the territory they point to. And I want you to carry all 3 of them with you as we go, because the answers do not arrive all at once. They come the way truth usually comes, which is slowly and with more texture than you expected, and with the kind of honesty that requires you to look at things you would rather not look at. What I can promise is this: every one of those questions gets answered. And the answer to the third one is the reason this story needs to be told. Let us begin from the beginning. From the woman Vivian Carter was before January of 2024, before the diagnosis, before the hospital room, before the silence. Because you cannot understand what was lost without first understanding what she had built. Vivian Simmons was born on August 7, 1971, in Atlanta, Georgia, the oldest of 4 daughters born to Dorothy Simmons, who worked as a nursing assistant at Grady Memorial Hospital for 31 years, and a father named William, who left the household when Vivian was 11 and whose absence taught her, in the specific way that a father's departure teaches an oldest daughter, that the world did not automatically organize itself around your needs, and that if you wanted something stable you were going to have to build it yourself. Dorothy Simmons did not allow her daughters to use their father's absence as an explanation for anything. She was present, she was exacting, she was warm in the way that capable women are warm, not softly, not indulgently, but with the kind of warmth that takes the form of showing up and doing what needs to be done and expecting the same from the people around her. Vivian was her mother's daughter from the beginning. She was the one who helped with her younger sisters. She was the one who stayed organized. She was the one who handled things. She graduated from Frederick Douglass High School in 1989, earned a full scholarship to Clark Atlanta University, and graduated in 1993 with a degree in Health Services Administration. She was 21 years old with a credential, a work ethic that her professors remembered, and a certainty about where she was going that was not arrogance, but simply the forward momentum of a woman who had been pointed in one direction her entire life and had not yet had reason to question the pointing. She took a position in the administrative offices of Piedmont Hospital in Atlanta immediately after graduation and distinguished herself in the specific way that capable people distinguish themselves in institutional settings. Not by demanding recognition, but by being consistently the person in the room who had already thought through the problem before anyone else finished describing it. Within 3 years, she had her first supervisory role. Within 7, she was managing a department. She was not a woman who waited for things to come to her. She went and got them. She met Marcus Carter at a cookout hosted by a mutual friend in the summer of 1992, a tall man from Macon who worked in insurance, easy in his manner, the kind of man who could make conversation with anybody and who made Vivian feel, in his particular warmth toward her, that she had been noticed rather than simply seen. They dated for 2 years. Marcus proposed at her mother Dorothy's kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon in November of 1993, with Dorothy in the room, which Vivian took as a sign that he understood something about the importance of that relationship in her life. They married in June of 1994 at Greater Zion Church, with Dorothy in the front pew and all 3 of Vivian's sisters as bridesmaids, and the photographs from that day show a woman who is not simply happy in the performed way of wedding photographs, but genuinely, specifically, present moment happy in a way that photographs rarely catch accurately. Jordan was born in 1997. Kayla arrived in 1999. And for a time, a genuine, unhurried time, The family that Vivian had always been building toward felt exactly as she had always hoped it would feel. The early years of Vivian and Marcus's marriage were genuinely good, and this needs to be said clearly because the events that came later can make it easy to read those early years as a prologue to betrayal rather than as what they actually were, a real partnership between two people who loved each other and were working in the same direction. Marcus was a good father in the early years. He was present. He coached Jordan's little league team. He came to Kayla's school plays. He and Vivian were a genuine team in the way that young couples with young children have to be, and for the first decade the team functioned. But the drift began in the way that it always begins. Not with a single event, but with the gradual, unremarked accumulation of small adjustments that are each individually explainable and collectively significant. Vivian's career grew more demanding. Her department became larger. The institutional complexity she was managing expanded year by year, and she brought that complexity home with her in the form of a busyness that was real, but that she also, in retrospect, used as a way of not examining the things that would have required her to be still. Marcus had never been fully comfortable with Vivian's professional confidence. That is not something she understood clearly until years later, but once she understood it, she could see it everywhere in their history. In the small deflations when she was recognized at work, in the subtle shift in his manner when her salary surpassed his, in the way he had gradually withdrawn from the partnership of the household and allowed her to carry more and more of it, while simultaneously becoming the person who benefited most from her carrying it. She had told herself this was the natural evolution of a long marriage, that roles settle and responsibilities consolidate, and that was just how it works. She had also told herself she was fine carrying the weight because she was good at it, and because the alternative, which was confronting what the imbalance said about the marriage, required a level of disruption she was not prepared to invite. So she carried it, year after year, until the year her body told her it was done carrying. Jordan was 25 when he moved into his own apartment in Atlanta, and the relationship between him and Vivian had always functioned smoothly in the specific way that a mother-son relationship functions when the mother has always handled everything and the son has never been required to handle anything in return. Jordan loved his mother. That was not in question. But the love had a structure to it that Vivian had built without fully realizing she was building it. A structure in which she was the constant provider of support, stability, and solutions, and Jordan was the recipient of all three. When she had a problem, she solved it herself rather than burdening him. When he had a problem, she was available immediately. The dynamic was so embedded, so habitual, so entirely normalized by 25 years of practice that neither of them would have been able to see it from the outside. It took the illness to make the structure visible, and what the structure could not do, it turned out, was reverse itself. Kayla was the one Vivian had always privately believed was different. The mother-daughter bond between them had a warmth and an intimacy that Vivian had never fully had with her own mother, not because Dorothy had not loved her, but because Dorothy had not had the time or the emotional vocabulary for that particular kind of closeness. Kayla had grown up telling Vivian everything. They had a relationship that other women in Vivian's life had commented on with visible envy, a genuine friendship between a mother and a daughter, built over years of proximity and shared confidence, and the kind of mutual knowledge that only comes from choosing to be open with someone. Vivian had assumed, in the way that you assume the things that have always been true about your closest relationships, that this closeness was unconditional. She had never tested it with anything that cost Kayla something real. She would test it soon. And the result of that test was the piece of the story that hurt the most, because it was the piece she had been least prepared for. The symptoms arrived in the summer of 2023. Vivian was 51 years old. She had not had a full physical examination in 3 years, not because she was careless about her health in the abstract, but because she was the person in her household who handled everyone else's health and had never quite gotten around to prioritizing her own, which is a pattern so common among Black women in the caretaking professions that it has its own body of public health research dedicated to documenting it. The fatigue was the first sign, not ordinary tiredness, but a weight that was present when she woke up and present when she lay down and present through everything in between, a heaviness that had no relation to how much she had slept. She began losing weight without changing anything about how she ate. By October, there was pain in her lower abdomen that she tried to attribute to stress, to schedule, to the accumulated physical toll of a difficult year. By November, the pain was specific enough and persistent enough that she went to her doctor, a woman named Dr. Okafor who had been her physician for 12 years and who did not allow her patients to minimize symptoms the way Vivian was attempting to minimize hers. Dr. Okafor ordered imaging immediately. The results came back on December 18, 2023, 1 week before Christmas. Stage 3 ovarian cancer. The tumor was significant. It had not yet spread to distant organs, which was the single genuinely good piece of information in a conversation that contained very little of it. Dr. Okafor walked her through the treatment plan with the specific, measured directness of a physician who respects her patients enough not to soften the truth beyond what accuracy allows. Surgery to debulk the tumor. Aggressive chemotherapy. Likely additional treatment depending on the surgical results. The road was going to be long and hard and was going to require consistent, sustained support from the people around her. Vivian drove home from that appointment alone. She sat in her car in the driveway of the house she had managed for 19 years. She did not cry immediately. She sat and she did what she had always done when something overwhelming arrived. She started organizing the information, making the mental list of what needed to happen next, who needed to be told, what arrangements needed to be made. She was so practiced at managing crisis that it took her 3 days to allow herself to feel how frightened she actually was. When she finally told Marcus that evening, he held her hand and said all the right things. She believed all of them. She had been believing all the right things from Marcus for 26 years. She told Jordan over the phone that weekend. He was quiet, and then he said, "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm going to be there." She told Kayla in person. Kayla drove over that Sunday afternoon and cried and held her and said, "Mama, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be with you through every step of this." Those words, "I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be with you through every step of this," are the words Vivian held on to in the weeks between the diagnosis and the surgery. They are the words that made the outcome, when it arrived, so specifically and precisely devastating. Because when the surgery came, and when the steps came, and when being there required something real, Kayla was not there. None of them were there. And the woman who had spent her entire life being the one who showed up was going to have to figure out, completely alone, what happens when nobody shows up for you. The surgery was scheduled for January 9, 2024. Vivian had asked Marcus to be at the hospital, not at home, not on call, but physically present in the building from the time she was taken back to the operating room until the time she woke up. He said he would be there. On the morning of January 9th, she arrived at the hospital at 6:30 in the morning. She registered, changed into the gown the nurse handed her, and sat in the pre-op bay with her phone in her hands waiting for Marcus to text that he had parked. The text did not come. The surgical team came instead, a resident to review her paperwork, an anesthesiologist to walk through the protocol, a nurse who noticed Vivian was alone and asked, with the particular gentleness of a person who has seen this before, whether there was anyone coming. Vivian said her husband was parking. She was taken to the operating room at 8:15. The surgery lasted 6 hours. She woke in the recovery room at 3 in the afternoon with a nurse named Denise squeezing her hand and telling her it was over, that it had gone as well as it could have gone. She was the only person in the room who knew Vivian's name. Marcus called that evening. He said something had come up, a work situation, a call he could not reschedule. He was sorry. He was going to come by the next morning. He came the next morning for 45 minutes. He sat in the chair beside her bed and said things that sounded like comfort without having the substance of it. And then he said he needed to get to a meeting and he would be back that evening. He did not come back that evening. He did not come back the following day. He texted on the third day, "How are you feeling today?" She answered. He did not respond until the next morning. This pattern of contact that was just frequent enough to make complete disappearance deniable, but never enough to constitute actual presence, continued for the full 6 days she was in the hospital. At no point during those 6 days did Marcus bring food, bring flowers, arrange for anyone else to come, or stay for longer than an hour. At no point did he sit with her through a night. She lay in that room and she thought, with the particular clarity of a woman who has always been very good at reading a room, that she was seeing something she had been refusing to see for a very long time. Jordan visited once, on day 3, for 2 hours, distracted and visibly uncomfortable in the way that young men are uncomfortable in hospitals when the person in the bed is someone they love and the situation requires them to be present with a kind of emotional availability they have never developed. He did not come back. Kayla did not come to the hospital at all during the 6-day stay. She sent the 3 text messages. Vivian's sister Renee, who lived in Charlotte, called every day, every single day, from the time Vivian told her about the diagnosis to the time she left the hospital, but could not get time off work to come in person. Vivian's closest friend from work, a woman named Sandra, brought flowers on day 4 and stayed for 3 hours, which was more than anyone in her household managed across all 6 days combined. Vivian noticed that. She filed it without comment in the category of things she was not yet ready to think about directly. She was too tired to think about it directly. She would get to it. She had no idea, lying there on day 5, how much clearer it was all going to become. On February 3, 2024, 3 weeks after the surgery, Vivian asked Marcus to sit down with her. Not a phone call. She asked him to sit at the kitchen table with her, in the house they had shared for 19 years, and have a real conversation. She had been home from the hospital for 2 weeks and had been largely managing her recovery alone, relying on her sister Renee's daily phone calls and Sandra from work bringing meals twice a week. Marcus was present in the house physically. He was sleeping in the guest room by then, which neither of them had formally acknowledged as a decision, but absent in every sense that mattered. She sat across from him at that kitchen table and she said, without softening it, "I need you to tell me what is happening. Not what you think I want to hear. What is actually happening?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. And then he said something that Vivian would spend the next 2 years turning over in her mind with the particular obsessiveness of a person trying to find the sentence that undoes another sentence, knowing all along that no such sentence exists. He said, "Vivian, I don't think I can do this. I know that's not what you want to hear, and I know the timing is." He paused. "I know the timing is terrible, but I've been unhappy for a long time, and I think we've both known that. And I don't think me staying here and pretending is helping either of us. I think it would be better if we separated." He said it in the tone of a man who has rehearsed this speech enough times that the delivery has gone smooth, which is its own kind of revelation. Vivian looked at him across that kitchen table, the table she had bought, the kitchen she had renovated, the house she had held together, and she said nothing for a long time. Not because she did not have things to say, because she was, in that moment, making an internal calculation about how much of herself she was going to spend on this specific response, and she was deciding that the answer was not much. She said, "You can go." He left the house 4 days later. He filed for divorce in March of 2024. And Vivian Carter, 52 years old, 2 months out of major surgery and still in the early weeks of chemotherapy, was alone in her house for the first time in her adult life. What Marcus did is not as unusual as it should be. Research on serious illness and marriage has consistently documented what oncologists and social workers have long observed in clinical practice, that a significant percentage of marriages dissolve following a serious diagnosis, and that this dissolution is notably more common when the sick partner is the woman. A study published in the journal Cancer found that couples were 6 times more likely to separate or divorce when it was the wife who was diagnosed with a serious illness than when it was the husband. 6 times. The dynamic that produces this outcome is not simply selfishness, though selfishness is involved. It is the particular outcome of marriages in which the woman has been the primary organizer of the household's emotional and practical life, where her illness removes the infrastructure that the marriage was running on, and the partner who has been depending on that infrastructure quietly decides that the dependency is not something they signed up to have reversed. Jordan called 2 weeks after Marcus left. The call had the quality of a call that has been prepared rather than felt. He had clearly thought about what he was going to say, which was considerate in its way, but the thinking had produced something careful rather than something honest. He said he was sorry about everything with his dad. He said he had been dealing with a lot. He said he was trying to figure out how to best support her, which was a sentence Vivian recognized as a sentence people say when they have not yet identified any specific way to support someone and are hoping that the framing will serve as a placeholder. She thanked him. She said she understood. She asked whether he could come by on Saturday to help her with a few things around the house that were difficult to manage while she was in the early stages of chemotherapy. He said he would try. He did not come Saturday. He did not call to say he was not coming. She texted him Sunday evening. He replied Monday afternoon. "Sorry, Mom. Something came up. I'll come next weekend for sure. He did not come the following weekend either. She stopped asking after the third time. Kayla called in mid-February of 2024. It was the call that Vivian had been both waiting for and dreading. The one with her daughter, the one with the person she had believed was closest to her in the world. Kayla talked for almost 40 minutes. She talked about how hard this had been for her, watching her parents' marriage fall apart, processing her father's choices, managing her own grief about the illness. She talked about her therapist. She talked about the importance of setting boundaries around situations that were triggering her anxiety. She talked about how much she loved her mother and how much she wanted to help, but that right now she was in a place where she needed to protect her own mental and emotional space. She said, "Mom, you're the strongest person I know. You're going to get through this. I know you will." Vivian heard all of it. She heard how genuine the feelings were. She also heard, with a clarity she had earned through 24 years of being Kayla's mother, that not one word of the 40-minute call had contained a specific offer of specific help. The call was about Kayla. The sick woman in the room was a supporting character in the story of Kayla's difficulty. Vivian said, "Baby, I love you." She meant it. And she put the phone down, and she sat in her quiet house, and she allowed herself, for the first time, to understand what she was actually dealing with. Her sister Renee drove up from Charlotte on a Thursday in late February of 2024 and stayed for 5 days, sleeping on the sofa, driving Vivian to her second chemotherapy infusion, cooking meals that she portioned and labeled and stacked in the refrigerator for the days ahead, sitting with her in the evenings and watching television and sometimes not saying anything at all, which was exactly the right thing to do. Those 5 days were the only sustained human presence Vivian had in the first 2 months of her treatment. When Renee left on a Sunday morning, hugging her at the front door, Vivian held on a few seconds longer than she normally would have, and Renee, who knew her sister the way only sisters can know each other, held back just as long without saying a word. Vivian stood in her doorway after Renee's car pulled away and looked at the empty street and thought, "This is what my life actually is right now. Not the version I performed for 30 years. The actual version." She went back inside. She put the kettle on. She sat down at her kitchen table, and she decided it was time to figure out who she was in the absence of all the things she had always defined herself by. There was one specific night in March of 2024 that Vivian has described, in the months since, as the night she came as close as she ever came to simply giving up on the idea that the other side of this was worth the effort of getting there. It was a Tuesday. She had been alone in the house for 12 days. The third round of chemotherapy had hit harder than the first two. The nausea was sustained and comprehensive. The fatigue was the kind that sits in your bones rather than just your muscles. And the neuropathy that had started in her fingertips had spread to her feet, so that walking to the bathroom in the night felt like walking on something that did not quite trust her weight. She had not eaten a real meal in 2 days. She was lying in the dark at 9:30 in the evening in the bedroom she had shared with Marcus for 17 of their 26 years together, and the silence of the house was so complete and so specific that she was aware of it as a presence. The silence of a house that used to be full, with a shape that is entirely made up of what is missing. She did not cry that night. She had cried plenty in the weeks before, and she would cry again. But on that particular Tuesday in March, she had moved past crying into something quieter and more foundational. She lay there and she thought, "I gave everything. I gave my time, my energy, my salary, my creativity, my patience, my presence, my body in pregnancy and delivery twice, my sleep for years on end, my ambitions set aside and rerouted to accommodate other people's ambitions. I gave everything a person has to give. And I am here, in this room, in this body, alone." The thought did not produce anger in that moment. It produced something more dangerous than anger. It produced a deep, exhausted, hollow questioning of whether there was any point to what came next. She let that thought fully arrive. She looked at it directly rather than flinching away from it. And then she did something that surprised her. She picked up her phone and she called Renee. It was late. Renee answered on the second ring. She did not say hello. She just said, "I'm here, Viv. Tell me." And Vivian talked for an hour. And by the time she hung up, something had shifted, small but real. She was not going to let this be the ending of her story. Before we go any further, we want to hear from you. Go to the comments right now and let us know, in your darkest moment, your real lowest point, who showed up for you and who didn't. Don't be polite. don't protect anyone. The most honest thing you write in those comments today might be exactly what someone else watching this tonight needs to read to keep going. We read every single comment on this channel. Every one. And while you're down there, let us know where in the world you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And if this story has reached you anywhere that matters, please hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Every story we bring you on this channel is a real life, a real survival. You deserve to hear every single one. On March 15th, 2024, the night after the phone call with Renee, Vivian Carter made a decision. She made it sitting at her kitchen table at 7 in the morning with a cup of ginger tea that she could actually hold down, in the first quiet and relatively pain-free hour she had had in several days. The decision was not dramatic. It did not announce itself with any particular feeling. It arrived the way the most important decisions sometimes arrive, as a quiet, settled knowing that something has permanently changed in the way you are oriented toward your own life. She decided that she was going to stop organizing her recovery, and eventually her life, around the people who had shown her they were not coming. She was done directing her energy toward the absence of Marcus and Jordan and Kayla and waiting for that absence to become presence. She was going to take everything she had spent 30 years giving to people who had not shown up for her, and she was going to give it, for the first time in her adult life, to herself. She opened a new note on her phone. She typed, "I am not the backbone anymore. I am the whole body. Now act like it." The first practical problem was transportation. Vivian had 6 months of chemotherapy infusions scheduled, each one requiring a 90-minute round trip to the cancer center, on days when she was frequently too depleted by the treatment itself to safely drive. She called the cancer center's social work department and spoke with a woman named Ms. Patricia, a patient navigator who had been doing this work for 18 years and who heard everything in Vivian's situation and did not make her feel ashamed of any of it. Ms. Patricia connected her with the American Cancer Society's Road to Recovery program, which provided volunteer drivers for treatment appointments, and with a meals program through the hospital that delivered food 3 times a week to patients undergoing active treatment. Both of these services were staffed entirely by people who had no obligation to be there. People who had chosen, out of their own freely given time, to show up for strangers. Vivian registered for both with the specific mix of gratitude and grief that comes from accepting help you never expected to need. Her first volunteer driver was a woman named Miss Gloria, 65 years old, a retired elementary school principal from Decatur, a breast cancer survivor herself from 2018, who drove a clean silver Toyota Camry and brought a thermos of chamomile tea on every trip because she had learned in her own treatment that it was the one thing that helped with nausea on infusion days. Miss Gloria did not make Vivian feel managed or pitted. She made her feel accompanied, which was an entirely different thing and which Vivian had not realized, until Miss Gloria provided it, was the thing she had been most starved of. They talked on those drives about work, about Atlanta, about their mothers, about what it meant to be a Black woman who had spent her life being the strong one, and what it cost, and what it was worth, and what it meant when the strength ran out temporarily, and you had to figure out what was underneath it. By the 4th drive, Vivian had told Miss Gloria things she had never said out loud to anyone except Renee. Miss Gloria listened to all of it and said, at the end of one of those drives, "Baby, the strong one doesn't mean the alone one. Those are not the same thing." Vivian sat with that for a long time. A woman from Vivian's church, Greater Zion, the church where she and Marcus had been married, the church she had continued attending alone every Sunday after Marcus left because it was her church first, and she was not going to let his departure take that from her too. A woman named Sister Audrey, who was 73 years old and had known Vivian's mother Dorothy and had watched Vivian grow up from a girl, began appearing at Vivian's front door on Saturday mornings with a covered dish and a specific combination of prayer and practical advice that Vivian recognized as the particular ministry of elderly church women who have seen everything and survived most of it. Sister Audrey never asked for anything. She never made Vivian perform gratitude in the way that charity sometimes requires. She sat at the kitchen table and she told Vivian about her own hard years, the illness, the losses, the times when God felt farther away than the ceiling. And she said, "You are not being punished, Vivian. You are being refined. There is a difference." Vivian was not sure yet whether she believed that. But she kept Sister Audrey's words in the place where she kept things she was not ready to agree with, but was not yet ready to dismiss. The long, involuntary stillness of chemotherapy recovery is not a gift, but it does force a kind of accounting that a busy life perpetually defers, and Vivian Carter, who had been running a department and managing a household and sustaining a marriage and raising 2 children on essentially one tank of self for 30 years, found herself, in the enforced quiet of those recovery weeks in 2024, finally sitting still long enough to look at the evidence of her own life with something approaching accuracy. She had been carrying everything for so long that carrying it had become invisible to her, not a sacrifice she was aware of making, but simply the ambient condition of her existence. The illness made the carrying visible by taking away her ability to do it. And what she saw, once she could see it, was not comfortable. She saw, with Marcus, something that should have been legible far earlier, but that she had been too invested in the marriage to read plainly. Their entire domestic arrangement had been organized around her labor and his convenience for at least the past decade. She had managed the house, managed the children's schedules, managed the social calendar, managed the relationships with both families, managed the emotional temperature of every room she walked into, while also working a full-time leadership position that paid more than his and that he had never, in any explicit way, resented, but had also never, in any explicit way, acknowledged. She had done all of this because she was good at it, and because it needed to be done, and because the alternative was letting things fall apart, and Vivian did not let things fall apart. What she had not fully understood was that in never letting things fall apart, she had never allowed Marcus, or Jordan, or Kayla, to discover that things falling apart was survivable, and that surviving it was their responsibility as much as hers. With Kayla, the examination was the most painful because the intimacy had been the most real. Genuine love and the willingness to be inconvenienced by someone else's need are separate things, and the gap between them is precisely the measure of a relationship's depth. Kayla's love for Vivian had always been expressed in the currency of closeness, of shared conversation and mutual confidence. It had never been tested in the currency of sacrifice. In May of 2024, 4 months into her treatment, Kayla called on a Saturday morning, not their usual contact time, which was itself a signal that something different was coming. She was different in this call. Not the careful, managed Kayla of the boundary-setting conversation, but the Kayla who had sat on the edge of Vivian's bed during thunderstorms as a child. The Kayla who had called her from a bathroom at a college party at 20 because she did not feel safe and needed her mother's voice. The Kayla who was unguarded and young and real. She said she had been talking to her therapist about what she had done. She said the therapist had helped her understand something about the way she had learned, growing up, to let her mother handle everything, and how that had translated, in the crisis, into a belief that her mother would handle this too, even when her mother was the one who needed handling. She said she was ashamed of herself. She said the shame was real. She said she wanted to come home, to be there, to cook for her, to sit with her through an infusion, to begin making it right. Vivian felt something in her chest open that had been sealed since January. Kayla said she was free the following weekend. She was going to drive down from her apartment in Athens on Saturday morning and stay through Sunday. Vivian said, "I would love that." She meant it completely. She went to the grocery store on Friday and bought Kayla's favorite things, the ingredients for shrimp and grits, the specific brand of sparkling water she liked, the vanilla wafers she had eaten by the handful since she was 10 years old. She changed the sheets in the guest room. She felt, for the first time in months, something that resembled looking forward to something. Saturday came. By noon, Kayla had not arrived and had not texted. Vivian called at 12:30. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She left no message. Kayla texted at 2:15. "Mama, I am so sorry. Something came up. I promise I will come next weekend." Vivian read the text. She looked at the shrimp defrosting in the sink and the vanilla wafers on the counter and the clean sheets in the guest room. And she allowed herself, fully and without softening, to understand what this was. It was not next weekend. She put the shrimp in the freezer. She ate the vanilla wafers herself, slowly, at the kitchen table. She did not call Kayla to discuss it. She simply filed it in the permanent record of what she now knew. That Saturday in May was the last time Vivian Carter organized any part of her life around an expectation of Kayla. Not because she stopped loving her daughter, She did not stop loving her daughter for a single day. But because she had now looked at the evidence with clear eyes twice, and the second time is the only thing more instructive than the first, she understood that what Kayla had to offer was warmth at a comfortable distance. Warmth that arrived in the form of phone calls and heartfelt texts, and therapy-informed declarations of love that never quite materialized into a body in the room when a body in the room was what was needed. That was the love available. It was not the love she had believed was available. Knowing the difference was painful. It was also the most useful thing Vivian had learned since the diagnosis. Because once you know precisely what is available to you, you can stop spending yourself in the pursuit of something that is not. In July of 2024, 6 months into her treatment, Vivian received an email from a woman named Dr. Adizobi, a health policy researcher at Emory University who had read a piece Vivian had written, not for publication, just for herself, in the personal journal she had been keeping on her laptop since the diagnosis, that her colleague Sandra had shared, with Vivian's permission, on a private health professionals forum online. Dr. Obi said she had read the piece 3 times. She said it articulated something she had been trying to put into language in her own research for 2 years. The specific experience of Black women in leadership and caretaking roles who face serious illness without adequate support, who have been so thoroughly formed by the expectation of self-sufficiency that they have constructed lives in which asking for help is structurally impossible. She asked whether Vivian had ever considered writing publicly. She said she had colleagues at a health equity journal who were looking for personal narratives from women with direct experience. She asked if she could pass Vivian's piece along. Vivian read that email, and then she sat with it for 5 days. On the 5th day, she wrote back and said yes. The piece was published in the journal in October of 2024 under her own name, with her photograph. She had not told anyone except Renee and Miss Gloria that it was coming. The response that arrived after publication was something she had not prepared for, not the volume of it, which was surprising, but the specific texture of it, the way it landed with women who read it. Black women, primarily, though not exclusively. Women in their 40s and 50s who had been the backbone of their families and their workplaces and their communities and who had, in varying degrees of crisis, discovered what Vivian had discovered, that the infrastructure of other people's lives is not the same thing as a life of your own, and that no amount of giving guarantees that anything comes back when it is your turn to need it. By November of 2024, she had been asked to speak at a conference on health equity and Black women's experiences. By January of 2025, exactly 1 year after her surgery, she had been contacted by a literary agent who had read the journal piece and wanted to discuss a book. She was also, at that same 1-year mark, receiving clear scan results. Dr. Okafor told her in February of 2025 that the imaging showed no evidence of remaining cancer. She was in remission. She sat in Dr. Okafor's office and absorbed the word remission, and she felt something she had not anticipated feeling in that moment. Not simple relief, though relief was there. What she felt most strongly was a quiet, settled determination. She had survived the illness. She had survived the abandonment. She had survived the specific loneliness of being a woman who had spent 30 years being indispensable and had discovered, when she needed something, exactly what indispensability was worth. She had survived all of it, and she was not going to waste what she had learned. The book proposal came together in the spring of 2025. The literary agent, a woman named Claire who had been doing this work for 20 years and who told Vivian plainly that she did not take on projects she did not believe in, sold it to a publisher in 4 weeks. Vivian took a leave of absence from the hospital to write it, a decision that would have been unimaginable to the version of herself that had existed before the diagnosis, the version for whom the job was not just employment, but identity, not just income, but proof of her own worth. She wrote the book in 8 months, in the house she had bought for herself after the divorce settlement was finalized in the summer of 2024. It was a smaller house, with a front porch that caught the morning sun and a yard that was entirely hers, and a kitchen she had painted a specific shade of green that she had wanted in a kitchen for years and had never been able to justify, because it was not a color that anybody else in her household would have chosen. She loved every room of it. She had never loved a space the way she loved that house. But Vivian Carter was not willing to write a book, or to speak publicly, or to build anything on the foundation of what she had been through, without doing the harder internal work first. She had been seeing a therapist named Dr. Lauren James since the summer of 2024, a black woman in her mid-40s who had a way of asking questions that left Vivian nowhere to hide, without making her feel trapped in the asking. The work they did together was the most uncomfortable, sustained effort of Vivian's adult life, and it was also the most important. What she found in that work was not a portrait of a purely innocent woman wronged by purely selfish people. It was more complicated and more honest than that. She found a woman who had, for 30 years, organized her entire sense of self around her capacity to handle things, who had built a life in which being needed was the primary evidence of being valued, and who had therefore, unconsciously, gradually, with no malicious intent, created relationships in which other people's dependency on her was the thing that made the relationships feel real. She had not been a martyr in the self-pitying sense. She had genuinely believed she wanted to take care of everyone. What she had not examined was the way that belief also served her. The way being indispensable protected her from having to be vulnerable, from having to ask for things, from having to discover whether people would show up if she were not the one providing the reason to show up. She had built a life that ran on her labor, and she had called that love, and she had believed it was the same thing. The illness made the difference between those two things undeniable. And seeing that difference, clearly, without the filter of the story she had been telling herself for 30 years, was the last necessary piece of the transformation. The book was published in October of 2025. Its title was "The Backbone Was a Person," a line from her original journal piece that her editor had immediately recognized as the heart of the whole project. It landed differently than Vivian had expected, which is to say it landed with a force she had hoped for but had not allowed herself to count on. The reviews were strong. The early sales were stronger. But what moved her was not the commercial response. It was the response from women who read it and wrote to her directly. Women in their 40s and 50s, black women mostly. Women who had spent their lives being the backbone of institutions and households and communities, and who had, in reading her story, found the language for experiences they had been carrying privately for years. Women who were still in their own versions of the abandonment. Women who had come through it and had never had a public space in which to say so. Women who needed to hear that what had happened to them was not unique, was not their fault, was not the end of their story. She had also, in the course of the previous year, built the network of people and connections that sustain a person through the kind of life she was now living. Miss Gloria remained a constant, not as a driver anymore, but as a genuine friend. Sister Audrey came for dinner every other Sunday. Renee drove up from Charlotte 4 times in 2025, not for emergencies, just for visits, for the ordinary maintenance of a sisterhood that had always been there, and that the illness had finally moved to the center of Vivian's life, where it belonged. And then, in October of 2025, 9 months after the remission was confirmed and 2 weeks after the book was published, Jordan called Vivian on a Sunday morning. Not a text, a call. He had read the book in one sitting, he told her, in his apartment on a Friday night. And when he finished it, he sat for a long time not knowing what to do with himself. He said, "Mom, I didn't know." She said, gently, "You didn't know, baby. You just didn't want to look at it." He was quiet for a moment. And then he said, "You're right. And I'm sorry." That admission, simple, direct, undecorated, was not nothing. Kayla called 6 days later. She had read the book too. She said reading it had been the hardest thing she had done in her life. And for once Vivian believed that was literally true rather than hyperbolic. The book did not mention Kayla by name, but the daughter in the story was recognizable to the daughter reading it, and Kayla knew herself in those pages in a way that evidently had not been easy to sit with. She said she was sorry. She said she was in therapy, genuine, sustained, doing the work therapy, not the kind she had previously used as a shield. She said she wanted to rebuild something with her mother if that was still possible. Vivian listened to all of it. And then she said, "It is still possible, but it is going to require both of us to be honest in ways we have not previously been honest with each other." Kayla said, "I know. I'm ready." Vivian said, "We'll see." And she meant it as an invitation, not a rejection. What Vivian did with each of these overtures was something that would have been entirely foreign to the woman she had been before January of 2024. She did not open the door wide in the relief of being reached for. She set terms, not cruel terms. She was not interested in punishment, but honest terms, with the weight of everything she now knew about herself and about the people she was agreeing to remain in relationship with. Vivian Carter says now, in March of 2026, with 2 years of distance and a rebuilt life standing between her and that hospital room, that the cancer was the most devastating and the most clarifying thing that ever happened to her. Not because suffering is instructive in the abstract, she would not recommend the instruction method to anyone, but because she had been operating inside a story about herself and her family that was not true, and the illness was the thing that made it impossible to keep operating inside that story. She had confused, for 30 years, need with love. She had confused being relied upon with being cherished. She had confused the warmth of people who benefited from her strength with the love of people who would be there when her strength ran out. The illness stripped every comfortable circumstance away and left only what was underneath, and what was underneath was a great deal less than she had believed, and also, in the place where she had never thought to look, a great deal more. Miss Gloria, in a silver Camry with chamomile tea. Sister Audrey, at the kitchen table on Saturday mornings. Renee, answering on the second ring at 10 at night and saying, "I'm here. Viv, tell me." These were the people who had loved her, not because of what she could do for them, but in spite of the fact that she currently could not do anything for anyone. That is the only definition of love that Vivian Carter uses now. It is a narrower definition than the one she started with. It is also the only accurate one. There is one more thing that happened in this story, one more turn that nobody saw coming, and that sits in Vivian's telling of it as the single moment that finally, after everything, moved her to tears. Not the diagnosis, not the hospital room, not Marcus leaving or Kayla's unfulfilled promises or any of the things that had every right to break her and hadn't. This, just 2 weeks ago, in March of 2026, 2 years and 2 months after the surgery, Kayla drove to Atlanta on a Saturday morning unannounced. Not a text ahead of time, not a phone call to ask whether it was a good time. She just came. She rang the doorbell at 9:15 in the morning, and when Vivian opened the door, Kayla was standing on the green kitchen porch with a bag of groceries in her arms and red eyes that said she had been crying in the car, and she said, "Mama, I just needed to come. I don't need anything. I just needed to be here. Can I make you breakfast?" Vivian stood in her doorway for a moment, looking at her daughter. At this young woman she had carried and delivered and braided and driven and worried over and loved with a completeness that had never had any conditions attached to it. Even in the worst of the previous 2 years, even when the love had cost her more than she could easily afford. And something happened in Vivian's chest in that moment that was different from everything that had come before it. Different from the relief of remission, different from the satisfaction of the book, different from the warmth of the rebuilt community around her. It was simpler than any of those things and larger than all of them. Her daughter had come, not because the book was getting good reviews, not because Vivian had something to offer, not with a prepared speech or a structured apology or a therapeutic framework. She had just come, with groceries, on a Saturday morning, because she needed to be there, because being a daughter meant something to her that was separate from comfort and separate from convenience. Vivian stepped back from the doorway. She said, "Come in, baby. Yes, you can make me breakfast." And Kayla came in. And Vivian Carter, for the first time since January of 2024, let someone else handle the kitchen. I want you to go back to where this story began. A hospital room in Atlanta. 2 in the morning. January 2024. A woman lying alone in a bed with a phone she had stopped picking up, a monitor counting out seconds in the dark, an empty chair beside her where someone should have been sitting. A woman who had given 30 years of herself, her labor, her creativity, her salary, her body, her sleep, her private ambitions, her Saturday mornings, every available piece of herself, to people who were not in that room. Hold that image. Hold the loneliness of it, the specific weight of it, the way it felt to be the woman who had always been the one who showed up, lying in the room where no one was coming to show up for her. And then hold that image alongside this one. That same woman, 2 years later, in March of 2026, sitting on a green porch in the morning sun, in a house she chose, in a life she built with her own 2 hands, letting her daughter make her breakfast for the first time in her life. The woman in the hospital bed and the woman on that porch share a name and a face and a history of doing everything for everyone. But they are not the same woman. The woman in the hospital bed was waiting to be chosen. waiting for the people she had loved to choose her back. The woman on the porch stopped waiting. She chose herself. And from that one decision, made at 2 in the morning in a room where no one was watching, everything that came after was possible. So let me ask you something. Not as a way of closing a story neatly, as a real question. The kind I want you to carry home with you. The kind that might sit at the back of your mind at dinner tonight, or on the drive home, or at 3 in the morning when the house is quiet and the honest thoughts are the only ones left. If that were you, if tomorrow morning a diagnosis arrived that stripped everything away and left only the raw fact of your need, who would show up? Not who says they would. Not who has always seemed like they would. Not who you have been carefully not testing for years because you are not sure you want to know the answer. Who would actually come? Think of every person in your life. Look at each one of them honestly. Ask, if I had nothing to offer them in return, if there was no benefit, no performance, no version of my strength available, would they come through that door? Because Vivian Carter will tell you, from the specific authority of a woman who lay in that room and counted, that knowing the answer to that question is not a threat to your relationships. It is the beginning of the only kind of relationship worth having. And the time to find out, the time to look clearly at who is actually in your corner, is right now, while you still have the luxury of doing something with what you find. If any part of Vivian Carter's story landed somewhere true for you, if any moment in what you just heard reflected something you have lived or are living right now, or are quietly, privately afraid you might one day face, then this channel was built for you. Subscribe, not for the numbers, for the person who is going to find this channel at 2 in the morning in their own version of that hospital room and need to know that someone made it through. That someone chose herself. That someone built something real and lasting and entirely her own on the other side of being left behind. There is another story coming on this channel, and I will say only this about it. What is coming next involves a woman who believed, for 23 years, that her marriage was the one thing she could always count on, until the one morning she discovered something that made her question every single year of it, all 23 of them, from the very beginning. The truth she found when she started looking was something none of us saw coming. We will see you there.